Okay,
did
let
it
me
did
just.
it give the recording announcement? Nice.
Yeah, I'm just trying to close this pop up. Okay, got it.
Oh, right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I can jump in.
Yeah, I don't mean to like steal an intro from you. Everyone, this is Emmett Methven. I met Emmett when we were working at Virginia Commonwealth University together. Um, Emmett has taught courses with me. Emmett has worked in films, starred in films that I have worked on.
That's
um,
true. I forgot about that.
yeah. Anyways, yeah. And I was super bummed when he moved to the West Coast, but also it's a very exciting opportunity. So, yeah, I don't want to steal any more time from you. So I'll just turn it over to Emmett. Thank you again, Emmett, for doing this for us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna
Oh,
try to
wait.
get.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll also say, like, I take notes during the presentation, but it looks like I'm not paying attention. I'm like doing this. That's not me not paying attention. That's me taking notes.
Cool. I have allergies too. I'm probably gonna be touching my nose a lot. I'm gonna try not to, but okay, cool. So yeah, just to add on to that intro a little bit. Yeah, I've been in California for 7 years, Los Angeles specifically. I'm gonna talk mostly about my personal work today. Even though that's not like technically how I'm sort of making money, it's not my like career per se. I have been fortunate enough over the last couple years out here. So I've done a pretty wide variety of like creative jobs and uh, different types of jobs, like working with a director. I was a director's assistant for a little while. I worked with a bunch of different production companies and photographers and directors, doing like image research, and then eventually like helping them kind of make pitches for music videos, for short films, a few feature films, um, with like huge artists, and kind of working directly with directors, sort of responding to their ideas and helping them like build visual materials to win a project. And I think like even though my personal work isn't really directly related to that, it is in the sense that I think like honing your own sort of creative vision and like your own sort of like visual universe, like it's helped me a lot with like my taste level, my aesthetic preferences, and all of those things like I think lead to success, like even if it's not, your work in a gallery that you're making money from, right? So creativity is kind of a universal language, I think. And so this is kind of how I keep up. And I still have a creative job now, but that I'll mention a little bit later. But this is kind of what I'm doing all the time, sort of on the side. And then this quote, I want to contextualize kind of the work through. This is a Mark Fisher quote. He was kind of a cultural philosopher, and he wrote a lot about this concept called hauntology, which is, I don't think he invented it, but he kind of popularized it, talking about its relationship to art and music specifically. This quote is actually talking about the musician Burial, who, if you're familiar with his music, he's like electronica, but also kind of like ambient, and he uses a lot of like retro aesthetics, degraded like vinyl sounds and like melancholy vocal samples. And it's very like cinematic and like gives this kind of overwhelming sense of like a place and like time. Um, and there's that element of like haunted sound to it where this can be applied to music, particularly can be applied to visual art, but it's also applied kind of culturally as well, where it's in the present situation, you're always kind of haunted by what's come before you, and then like also what could come after you, and also things that are sort of lost, there are futures that won't happen. And I think that like I didn't always like think about it this way, but I think that's sort of a good key to kind of connect all the different threads and interests and influences in my work, specifically the photography stuff. Um, and to take it a little bit further, I think like in my photography, I'm sort of making views into like my own version of like a haunted landscape. Um, so there are these kind of elements and objects that seem to have potential for some sort of like memory, or bits of like reality coming into this like fantasy world, anxiety, dreams, like all of these things, that I almost think about it as like I'm playing a role of somebody who's like retreated into like this fantasy universe, and all these things are different kind of scenes that you find there. But there's also kind of like a coldness to it, or like like it's sort of like a disappointing fantasy world where like everything is kind of closed off to you, or there's like a disconnect sometimes, to the extent that I photograph people, or like figures that show up in my work. There's always like a semi anonymity to them, and it's more about like the idea of people, or like the idea of an encounter, that doesn't necessarily have a lot of resolution to it. And to bring it back to the hauntology concept, I think like even when I'm making this work, like I'm listening to a lot of musicians, Burial being one of them, but also like a lot of like ambient music. I listen to a lot of like film soundtracks, both when I'm making art, but also like just in my day-to-day life. And I've actually like infected my work where like now all we listen to is like my ambient playlists at work all day. And like, so it's kind of, I'm constantly in this like heightened state of like, thinking about the world in this way. And then that's kind of reflecting back in sort of the world that I'm creating visually. And it's more than just kind of the music that I'm listening to. It's like the soundtrack literally to this kind of imagined world that, when I make art, I sort of go into this like, imaginary place that I can kind of, format all these ideas. These juxtapositions are kind of experimental and random, but I've just certain that's kind of, these images don't come from like a formal kind of idea of a series. Like these are all images from like 8 or 9 years, different points that, and I'll get a bit more into this shortly, but I basically just shoot kind of continuously. And then at certain points I'll stop and go back, and kind of sort things into a series, give it a title. But that's really just kind of a chapter in a longer continuity where I think all these things kind of ultimately, can piece together, and be repieced together in different ways. This is a photo of my brother, pretty old photograph, from I think when I was an undergrad, but I think that's kind of the other force as well in my work. Like there's almost like, I think, and still, I mean, I'm 30 years old almost, but like, I think I have like a boyishness kind of in my approach, and like, sort of an adolescent like curiosity, to an extent that's like a role that I'm taking on when I'm kind of arranging or picking what image I want to use. But yeah, this idea that, everything is kind of mysterious and to be discovered. And photography is kind of my way to engage with the world, in that way. Like I am kind of a shy person, and I don't necessarily shoot all the time. I'm not one of those people that like takes my camera everywhere and is always shooting. But I do like photography's ability, and having a camera, the ability, and a lot of photographers will talk about this. If you have like social anxiety, or you maybe feel a little bit outside of certain situations, the camera is like the ultimate kind of excuse to sort of like let your eye wander, explore an environment, strike up a conversation with someone, meet somebody, arrange a little photo shoot with somebody, and that's way more valuable than just making a piece of art, for starters. But like, that is kind of like, I draw a lot of my imagery from just everyday kind of almost banal observations and situations, banality, but also like trying to infuse a little bit of like the fantastic into that as well, through like both like the way certain things are shot. It's very singular. I tend to, you see that in some of these other images. It's basically, I'll show you like one single thing, and then it's more about the sequence and like the juxtapositions and like it's not to say that I don't think a single image of mine is like good enough on its own, so to speak, but like I do think like I sort of have like an editor's mind with like certain series or like a puzzle to put together, and you know, playing around with combinations of images or you know, but I always kind of end up going back to this certain singular type of photograph where you know, it's a single object or it's a single person or a figure, and that kind of gives it a continuity visually you know, all these photographs could have been taken like in the last year, right? But it's several years, and it's many disparate kind of encounters. But even though, you know, sometimes I'll do a whole shoot and I just end up taking the one photo that looks like all my other photos, like that's the one that I end up enjoying the most. So it's kind of inevitable, like it's become my sort of style. But yeah, all of these different images kind of come together over and over again in different ways. And then on that note, I wanted to cite, I don't know how often he's kind of talked about nowadays. He's like a little bit under the radar, but Ro Etheridge, I kind of became aware of his work maybe like 10 years ago. He was in MoMA, New Photography in 2010. That's kind of where he blew up. And he's sort of like, he's very known for, I don't know, he didn't necessarily invent this, but he's very known for kind of popularizing this kind of idea of like everything is just like a giant library that you shoot. And then every time, like he's done like 10 books, but like every time he does a book, he's drawing from the same single massive library of images he's taken over decades. And that includes like fashion, you know, you see in this image, like a fashion editorial, almost like a beat, like an outtake from a fashion editorial, a still life, a kind of documentary style, those two photographs. And then this like weird clip art thing on the left. And he's kind of, I think I've got another one. Yeah, so this is another one of his. And you can see like, at first glance, these photographs have nothing to do with each other. And literally they don't either, but he's kind of, and he'll repeat images from show to show or from book to book, but in a new context. And so he's drawing from like the entire visual catalog that he's kind of constantly adding to. And that's kind of how Wolfgang Tillmans is kind of another example of this. I mean, he's kind of like the master of that. So I guess what I enjoy about this is like it comes down to the edit and like the sequence and the pairing. I found a quote about Ro Etheridge's work where somebody said his photographs are almost scaffolding for the narratives that fall in between them. So and I think that kind of applies to what I think about as well when I'm making work or rather kind of presenting it, which is, you know, sometimes it is just like I'll draw kind of a random handful and then I see kind of, does this kind of start to make sense? And then if it's not, you know, and then I can sort of see, well, this piece is missing. And there is kind of a fun element of like, yeah, I think Etheridge kind of talks about sequencing as like songwriting and musical fugues. And so I do like this idea of like, you know, it's kind of a puzzle to be put together. So that's one influence. And then I think another sort of idea that I think about a lot when I make work is sort of this, this is like a French surrealist quote from Andre Breton, who I think he was like a Dali, a friend of Dali's. That's the artist Dali, not the AI software, but and kind of these French surrealists in like the 1920s. And this is a little bit more like abstract and gets a little bit kind of silly and magical, but like this quote to me is basically saying like, you know, if you condition yourself to constantly engage with the world and kind of attune yourself to your kind of creative desires, your next move will be kind of revealed to you continuously. So I know like one story that Breton like talks about is like, or one example is he says, you know, if you go to a market and you say, at this market today, I'm going to find something, I'm going to find an object that I'm going to integrate into my art. You know, inevitably, by virtue of thinking that way, you'll find something there that kind of draws your attention. So it's a little bit kind of, you know, without going total like law of attraction, like this idea of like, even if you look at things very abstractly, and sometimes like I think a lot of the ideas I think about, um, that to me my work speaks about, it's not always literally shown to you, and in fact almost always it's not really literally shown. So sometimes these connections are really abstract, but um, this idea that nothing's really a coincidence, and if you kind of know your personal universe, you'll find things all the time that sort of slot in. Um, so I'm pretty open to that kind of like randomness, and also like the patience, of like, I'll collect objects all the time, and like from all kinds of different places, like um and sometimes I have to wait, or like I'll try to do something with it, and it just doesn't excite me, and I have to wait, and then something will happen. Like in this case, I got a whole bunch of these like vintage, like adult magazines, from somebody, and then I wanted to do something with this specific one because it was like kind of an infamous issue about Jackie Kennedy, um, where her photographs got kind of leaked by her husband, her second husband. So I thought it was like an interesting cultural object. And then I wanted to put like a lizard on top of it. And I tried to do that at first, like in the wild with no one like helping. Like I went somewhere where I knew there were like little lizards like running around. And it like didn't work at all. But so I had to sort of wait, and I didn't do anything with it for like 1 or 2 months. And then I just met somebody that happened to have this bearded dragon. So, I was able to kind of pull this idea back, and make this photo happen. So, there's sort of like a trust element involved with myself, where it's like sometimes, if I get it's very intuitive, and like if I get the idea to shoot somebody or grab an object at a store or whatever, and then even if I have to hold on to it or not really show the photos for a little while, eventually like I'll find ways that it sort of makes sense. And sometimes, like my thoughts aren't rigid either. So it's like certain things will happen to me where, I also joke a lot that like especially when I shoot people, because, obviously you want to show somebody the results, or they want to see it, they want to post about it or whatever. I always joke, like it takes me like literally like a year to like figure out like what the photograph is that I really like from something, like precisely because like I'm not, I don't, except for more recently, I'm trying to be a bit more free about putting stuff out there that isn't maybe like fully resolved. But um, sometimes it is just like finding something, and then trusting that it's gonna kind of fit in later in a bigger sort of family of images as well. And then, Dana, you commented before about like the putting stuff in bushes, and like that kind of like I feel like my visual tropes, like that I'm very like happy like playing in at this point, like it sort of happened like by accident. Like the process really is like the work itself, in the sense that like, photographs like these, like sometimes I would shoot something, and, if I found like this DVD or whatever, and I'd take a photograph of it like as it laid. And then, I'd sort of say to myself, well, that's not really the photograph. That's not the photograph. I'm going to go back and do something else with it later, or I'm going to use it as a prop in something. And then inevitably, like you do that enough times and you realize like, oh no, wait a second. Like this is my style. This is like what, and the fact that like a lot of times, like sometimes it's because they're found objects, but a lot of times, photographing things outside, it's just because like I didn't have that, I don't have a studio. I don't, I didn't have a lot of money, a few years ago trying to do shoots with people. So it became more about photographing objects and textures and things I just saw in the world, that I could shoot for free. It's easier to deal with light outside. And then those things kind of born out of, limitations almost. They kind of became like, when I talk about this kind of imagined landscape, or this like world that all these photographs kind of exist in, like that's literally how I think about it now, where it's like, imagine this kind of universe where you're wandering around this like outdoor environment, and there's all these kind of random pieces of like, memory objects like scattered everywhere. And that's kind of just happened over time and kind of become like the sort of visual language that I've made my own. So this photograph on the right, I'm going to kind of transition into like the other, that's, you see there's a kind of like a glitch there, like a little technological, intervention that happened like by accident in Photoshop, I think. And then I ended up like keeping that one. And I think that, when I think earlier I said something about, this, I like this idea of like a disappointing fantasy world where like you kind of hit the wall at a certain point. And, I think certain images like this, where there's like, and I'll get a bit more into this when I talk about some of the stuff I've done on camcorder, like you really literally bringing in these like glitches and sort of incomplete images and things that like deal with technology a bit more directly. And because that's kind of another thing that, and especially with like the current state of like the internet and like the promise of like, a metaverse or a matrix that we're all going to live in at some point, like, we're so digitally intertwined. And I mean, all these things are very like cliche to talk about now, which is amusing, but like, we face such digital like hyper stimulation constantly, but then that's only really still like in our phones and our computers. And like in between those moments, we have to like engage with the physical kind of banal reality still. And that sometimes isn't as exciting. And then other times like the digital retreat isn't really that exciting. So that's something I think about a lot, where it's almost like, how do you make work about technology and digital hyperstimulation and the like the history of time, like flattening that sort of happens with the internet, where there's all these kind of retro aesthetics being thrown around and things like that, where how do you make work about those things without literally just like taking photographs of computers or whatever, like so thinking about like how does it make me feel versus like trying to make work that's like literally about that. So I think that kind of feeds into the sort of like the sort of banality that I talked about, but also like the sort of like incomplete fantasy, or like the kind of unfulfilling fantasy, and trying to maybe break through that and get to something more like real and satisfying. So I'm gonna try to get through this whole presentation. So these are some books I've made over the years, where, like I said, I basically just stop every now and then and look back at a massive group of images, and I try to pick some that feel like they speak together, and then I put out a little edition of a self-publication. So and this is kind of a good way to sort of trace my creative journey over the last couple of years, like getting into taking things off of a screen and learning how to not really design so much, but like sequence things for real, not just on Instagram, not even just on my website, but like putting things in an object, while these things are still kind of around and like somewhat respected, and like, having that experience of like, what's like on the cover, and what's the font that I'm using or whatever, where like you don't really get all these opportunities sometimes like on certain digital platforms. So it's kind of a fun way to like extend like your visual sort of touch. And then also, even just the way that I've documented them here, like, again, going back to like these tropes of myself that I've sort of started to, embrace, like putting things just kind of out in the wild, almost like inventing them as found objects, or staging them as found objects. And then maybe there is a bit of a progression here as well, like getting to the more directly Los Angeles iconography on the far right there. And then I'm actually going to talk a bit more about that book.
Oh, sorry. Hey, I have a quick question about that image of Paradise Circus.
Yeah.
So did you just kind of like drop? I want to know the process since we're talking to the artist.
I went to Hollywood Boulevard, which is a very haunted place, and not in a good way. But I basically just went out there at like, 9 in the morning or something on like a Sunday when it was pretty quiet and somewhat empty. And yeah, I literally just I went out actually, so I didn't go out there with the intention of making that putting it on a star. I was gonna just put it like against some buildings that I knew about. And I didn't really like the way that looked. And then I noticed like right across the street, I was like, okay, there's a star with no name on it. Um, so yeah, I literally just like threw it on the ground and then took some photos. And then like every time somebody would walk through, I'd like pull it away and like, um, but yeah, just literally just discarding it and then creating this kind of encounter with it. Um, and yeah, so that's like an LA book, obviously. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and this kind of bring me into the camcorder stuff as well. Dana, just by the way, I mean, I'm not gonna go on forever, but is there like a hard stop?
I don't want to
Just like I pace myself a little bit.
yeah, I don't want to keep you forever, but like maybe another 15 minutes before we turn it over to questions.
Cool. Yeah, that should be perfect. Yeah, so this is kind of bringing me into the kind of other visual practice that I've been way more engaged in. That's also, using the same thematic and approach, but maybe gets a bit more into this sort of retro aesthetics and lo-fi stuff. So this is a book. These are from this book on the right, Paradise Circus. And the reason why it's like on a star and it's kind of LA iconography. I went to in general, I'm kind of interested in these settings where I get to kind of take that style that I talked about, this like singular image style, looking for objects, going into a place with the expectation of I'm going to find certain things that make sense to me, taking all those philosophies and then almost thinking like, okay, I could go into any situation and kind of find cool stuff to photograph. And this so what I did here was I went to an adult film convention, like an adult industry event in Los Angeles. This was sort of happenstance. Obviously living in LA, I'm kind of fascinated by the different sort of like undercurrents and obviously like pornography is kind of one of those undercurrents, and like that's sort of intertwined with like stardom and the film industry. And so you brush shoulders with these forces like a lot. So I knew about these things, but then it was sort of inspired by another artist I follow, who I didn't put in here, but named Brendan Lynch, who he's like a painter and mixed media artist, but he did something that I'd seen right before this, where he had gone to an adult convention and like made like he like painted shirts or something, but he did something like with materials only sourced from the event. And he like made his own little bootleg like booth there and stuff. So I had seen that and that was kind of in my head. It's like, oh, that would be a cool idea to like do something like that. And then literally I was driving on like a Saturday. I saw a billboard for this event. I noticed it was like that day. And I was like somewhat close to it. So I literally just like bought a ticket and took my camcorder, which is actually right here, that I shoot on a lot. And I went to this event and I took some photographs there. And actually, when I say I took photographs there, what I actually did and how I make art with the camcorder, this is maybe a little bit cheeky in terms of how to make images, but like I basically just record video continuously. And camcorder, maybe if you've used one before, like it's incredibly freeing, I think, in the way that like you can absorb so much, and like mine's got like a crazy zoom, so like you can capture so much stuff, even just standing still. And then I'm sort of going through that footage later and pulling out stills, and those kind of become the images. The video doesn't really work on its own. And I'm trying to get to a point where, because of the way I'm shooting to try to compose in a video, it's like I'm zooming out or I'm zooming in and things like that. So it really only works as like raw material to pull stills, but at least in the way that I've been doing it. But so that's kind of what I did. I went into this like crazy hyper stimulation environment and just sort of tried to look for like these kind of like banal moments. I mean, I was like really uncomfortable when I first went in there. You know, it's not like I said, I mean, I'm a pretty like insular person, and like but then like you realize like really quickly like it's like it's settled into like this really kind of, you know, I mean, it was post COVID earlier this year, so like it wasn't really that well attended, and like everyone was just kind of sitting around, and like there was like a banality to it and like a weird, but they're also like half naked. So um you know, I was just kind of looking for like these different scenes and objects that kind of point towards um you know, that kind of weird surreality of the whole experience. And then the camcorder itself, I'm going to transition out of this series. This is kind of one example, really, that I don't normally do, of like, I just had all these images and I was like, you know what, this could be a series in and of itself, versus being plucked into and combined with other stuff, kind of like I was talking about at the beginning. It seemed like I had enough to kind of make it a singular little group, which was an interesting way, you know, to, I had to be kind of, I'm super picky about like what shots I like and don't like, but I had to be a bit more kind of, you know, open-minded about certain images that, not necessarily ones that are included here. I think it was like 30 something total that I put in. So, and I didn't necessarily, you know, it wasn't really about like capturing the totality of this event, like as a document. But I think, you know, for looking for stuff that kind of tiptoed into this world, I think it was a pretty exciting little endeavor. And then, yeah, just kind of running through some other, this is all mini DV stuff of mine. So you see like, I don't know if it's really glitched, but it's sort of like when you rewind the tape, if you haven't used mini DV before, at least the one that I have, you have to like, to get it records to a tape, and then to get the footage off the tape, I have to like plug it into my, not even this computer, but like my old laptop, and then play it in QuickTime in real time. And then I have to record it as a QuickTime movie. So when you rewind the tape, it gives you these like weird kind of like lines of the underlying image of the neck when two clips like meet each other. So that kind of inadvertently results in number one, some kind of interesting like glitch elements where it's almost like a double exposure of sorts, but then just kind of like interesting randomness in terms of even how the I don't know what you call it, but like the glitchy sort of lines like materialize, and how that affects, like, because I'm not recording thinking about how they're going to show up, but so there's that element of kind of you know, being open to sort of random technological kind of you know, manipulation. And then just like playing with the camcorders, like built in sort of like weird effects, and like trying to make serious art with them, or and so I'm still, you know, I'm trying to figure out how it resolves like the video itself, because I do want to get more into motion, and I'll show a little bit of mini DV stuff if I can get to the end here, but you know, these are all just kind of, again, like scattered shoots that I've done where I've brought them in EDV, and like you can see some of the like double exposure. Sometimes it's kind of subtle, like these, which I just like if there's like a texture that comes in on top of something. And so now we get into this. So these images and the next few images you're going to see they're actually AI generations. I was using DALL-E 2, and I've used Stable Diffusion a little bit as well, but I'll kind of go back and forth between that and DALL-E 2. Which, if you haven't, oh, actually you have, because you've done the assignment about it. But yeah, I do think AI, obviously it's a massive conversation that, you know, could be its own talk. The sort of its relationship to artists, and, you know, the autonomy and all that stuff. I initially was just kind of making images with it and trying to make things that looked like photographs that I could conceivably make, that kind of slotted into my style. And then more recently, I've tried to sort of push it even further by So how these are made is like I'm basically generating images in DALL-E, and then recording my screen with my camcorder, and then getting and then re-recording that footage back. So like I said, you're getting the glitch, you're getting the DALL-E stuff, and that's interesting, kind of in a few different ways. Number one is like you're directly engaging with, and this is why AI, the image generation stuff, is kind of fascinating to me right now. Like you're directly relating. I mean, you're directly engaging with like the digital artifice and like the simulation itself, and like seeing how computer learning and how it's like processing what you're telling it to do. And sometimes it can't even get close to what I'm trying to say. The mini DV kind of masks some of the imperfections of it as well. And I've sort of realized like this hack more recently, where if you tell it to give you something out of focus, it kind of smooths it even further, and then the mini DV kind of gives it another kind of separation where, they almost become like painterly and abstract in a way that I think kind of gets more towards like these ideas I was talking about way at the beginning of like memory and fantasy and kind of these like lost, imagined, scenes and places. And so that for me is kind of like where AI like sits right now. It's just another interesting tool. I've done a lot of, I didn't talk about all of them today, but I've done a few different projects where like I've sampled imagery, even my like objects that I find in photograph. It's like I like seeing things and reacting to them and kind of sampling visual media. And so, whether it's an object I find on the ground, an old magazine photo or whatever, or a stock video, which I'll show after this, that I'm kind of remixing, or in this case, an AI generated image that I am having some hand in generating, and then kind of playing with the camcorder to see if I can manipulate it a bit further. So it's just another kind of interesting way to generate material for me. And then, yeah, I just want to show a few video clips real quick. I don't know, there's no sound on these, I don't think. It's not important today if there is, but this is kind of just another like more recent thing I'm playing around with that's like stock video, a loop that sort of like gets progressively more like fucked up looking and like degraded, with like data moshing. And so the idea here is like, it's difficult. It's maybe a bit trickier than like just making photographs and putting out a zine, where like, I like thinking about, what would this look like in a space, like living? And so I think about video a lot as like loops, where this video can just kind of breathe continuously, and exist in a space alongside an installation, or in my house on a monitor or whatever. So a lot of my kind of motion experiments are more kind of like little loops that can kind of continuously just exist alongside. So there's like a little bit of camcorder combined with stock in this one. These are all just kind of like little experiments and like works in progress, and like also like the glitchy, Dana, I don't know if you remember, but like I think about this all the time. Like when we were teaching together once, like there was like a student who had like a glitchy PowerPoint or something, or there was like, she was playing a video where
Oh yeah,
whenever it's supposed to be this like serene footage of like literally like water and like nature, but then every time the video looped, it like did so really awkwardly, or like it made a noise or something. And like I started to talk about in the critique like how that was like what was interesting about the video, was that it was kind of failing at being this like quiet, serene video, which was the intention, I think. So I think about that a lot, and like this kind of intentionally trying to like be sloppy with like how I'm like putting clips together, or data moshing or whatever. Again, just reinforcing that like technology fantasy, the kind of messy nature of it. And then the last thing, which kind of brings me to my day-to-day kind of reality. This is a video I made as part of my current job. Just really briefly, so I work for essentially like an art studio right now. It's a brand called Secret Walls, which you know, check it out if you want to. It's a live art event. So we basically like we've done a lot of different things because of COVID. We've had to, you know, we've moved into like creating content, but traditionally it's an event where artists sort of in the street art world and artists kind of battle each other. And it's like illustration and that sort of thing. But during pandemic, we kind of had to pivot and do all these sort of like content creation projects that had nothing to do with live events. And in short, one of those projects was we got to direct a video for Puma, this for Puma football, so like the soccer division, advertising a shoe which was like created by us, this like limited edition soccer shoe that was all about like it drew inspiration from Los Angeles and like the neighborhoods that we live in, and so we got to create. We took the budget for what was supposed to be a live event that couldn't happen. And then we created this like short art film, essentially, me and my creative director at my job, and then our friend of ours who was helping us film. So this is just like a really short clip from that. And you'll see like we combined, mini DV, drone, HD, like, and it just became this like collage. I think there's even like iPhone stuff in the video. And it's just this sort of like cool, like, music video essentially. And we licensed this music track from an artist who I really like. So again, it's like having one foot constantly in like your personal taste and like owning like, your influences sonically as well as visually, and your own just kind of passions. It just randomly, I think I was like playing it at work, and we were like, what if we put this like in the video, and then everything else kind of fell together. So we had like a month. I mean, it was crazy. Like we just had a month of like just shooting like so much stuff, and then having fun and kind of playing around. And so this is kind of one example where the mini DV actually did kind of wind up. Like I shot all that stuff in this video. And just one interesting way where like I got to kind of see it in a, I don't know, more of like a real world context maybe, or like a commercial context. So Dana, maybe I'll send that link to you because it's kind of a cool video in its own right, to check out.
Yeah, I love that piece. That piece is awesome.
And then, yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I think so, if we want to talk, I don't know, Dana, any questions or discussion from you, about anything.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a million questions in these, but we didn't do this time for some reason, but I like to start these when we have just a couple of people join us live with the people who are joining us live, sort of like introducing themselves and sharing like their perspective, where they're coming from this. I'm gonna out Natasha a little bit in that like Natasha does a lot of stuff with camcorder and projection and performance. Awesome. But specifically what I wanted to ask you, Emmett, and made me think of this because I know Natasha generates music, and I know that you're also a musician, Emmett, or what do you call yourself? Musician, beat maker, producer?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not a musician at all. Like I have no training, but I do like, I like, I'll DJ, and I've kind of dabbled in DJing and mixing for the last like decade or so. And I think of it more as like the sound stuff that I'll make is like, it's more sound design, I guess, or like it's sampling and like making just kind of making loops and like things like that will find their way into like a video piece that I make or whatever.
So that was my
draws from music that I like, but yeah, maybe it's more like sound design.
That was my actual, like my specific question was like, how does or could you talk just for a couple of minutes about how your sampling interests in music inform or crosstalk with your sampling interests in like how you walk around and generate images? Because you talk about like how you generate images is a lot like sampling. So like, do those like happen at the same time in your mind, like, or like in the same way, or they feel pretty different? Like how I visually sample and how I sonically sample, those are distinct.
I mean, I think like you know, like similar to how I was saying, like visually, I think like I have a really, I've kind of defined the approach, and I'm pretty streamlined in it at this point. Like I think slowly, like, and I haven't done a ton of, I haven't been as like rigorous in like this sort of, let's say, practicing constantly of like, like literally sampling sounds and doing stuff with that. Although I have kind of picked up like mixing music again. Um, but it is kind of similar in the sense that like, I only listen, like I've got a playlist that I listen to and I'm working on music that's kind of curated. And then sometimes I'll literally just like try to sample those songs and like do something with them, or you know, uh, seeking out certain films, like, I mean, anything that I'm kind of engaging with, like in my day to day, like I go to movies all the time, which is kind of one cool thing about living out here. Like there's always like theaters showing like old movies that I've never seen, um, from like across genre and time. And so, I'm sort of trying to get really open about just like engaging with, all these kind of like different ideas. But then, yeah, I think like they're all feeding into, um, similar to what I was saying with like, I'd like to think I can go into any environment with this kind of knowing how I make imagery and find a way to like get cool imagery in there. I think it's somewhat similar to the music thing too. Like, it's maybe not at the forefront, but it's like that's always kind of playing in my head, where, um, like when I'm making a video, I don't always start with the sound, but I sort of know what it's going to be. Um, and then sometimes it is just like intuitive. Like if I hear a song that I like, that might be my first choice, just to try it out, try to get a sample out of it or whatever. Um, but I'll kind of slow it down. There's obviously there's ways you can kind of distort the source material, um, to kind of make it fit regardless of like where it's coming from. So there's like that element as well. Um, but yeah, that's
Cool.
something I want to explore a bit more. I used to have like Ableton, which I was like really good at, and I haven't. I need to like rebuy it. Because my cracked copy like is long gone on an
No.
old system. But that like like Dana, I think like even when we did that like DJ set or like performance where we were, I was playing loops that I had made, and Dana was generating sound through like your different like electronic like
Stuff.
inputs and whatnot. That was like just I'd go into like it was just a way to like create prompts for myself. Where like at that specifically those like little loops that I was making, the way I did that was like I would just go like to a coffee shop every day and like not leave until I like made at least like one thing that I was kind of happy with. Like so it was trying all different things and not really knowing like what it was going to come out sounding like. Um, but then like the process is like the thing itself. So it's like eventually like um and you get better that way as well. But yeah, I don't know. That's I want to get back into that a bit more. And I've gotten to do a bit of that with work too, like my day job. I do a lot more. I've had to do a lot more video editing for them, like for stuff for like Instagram, and I've edited some like long form like vlogs, and then I'm working on like a sort of a documentary right now for them of like this US tour that we just did. And so that obviously sound is like a big part of editing as well, not just like integrating like recorded dialogue or whatever, but like the sound design of like, it really is like a magic of like when you insert certain sounds and like Foley stuff and like, really evoking like the sense of a scene and kind of even heightening it from the footage that you have or whatever. Um, so that's really interesting to me. And I think like, whether or not I'm shooting the video stuff myself, like editing and kind of putting sound with music and all that stuff, and or sound with visuals. That's always kind of exciting to me.
Before we go too long, I definitely want to make sure that we open the floor to questions. If Natasha or Jackson have any questions they want to ask Emmett.
I know I have a couple technical ones. You showed a picture where it looked like a shiny foil with like petals on it. What was that foil? Or like, was it even foil? Can you, yeah, that one.
I think I don't know for sure. I mean, I think this literally, it wasn't like I don't think it was actually like aluminum foil. I think I had some kind of like, I'm trying to think of where I would have gotten that. But it was some kind of like, oh, you know what? So this was like a tablecloth that someone had bought for like a book fair table that I was like putting together, and it was like little rectangular like tiles. You can maybe sort of see like how it, and then I just kind of like crumpled it up. But yeah, it was this kind of reflective, surface. So I don't know what you call that, but you can probably find it. Yeah, I believe it was like literally like a dollar store type tablecloth. And then yeah, the petals obviously self-explanatory.
Thanks. And then I have a question about like the data moshing. How do you do that? Do you code that yourself, or do you have like a plugin? Because I want to get into that, but it's too far.
So I'll give away a little secret here. The way I did this, so there's literally a website. I don't have it on hand, but it might even literally be like datamosh.com or something like that. But like where you can upload a video, and then I'm not even quite sure how it works, but like there's like a form that you can kind of type stuff into, and then like and then there's like a sliding scale of like I don't know, I guess the degree of whatever. So like for this video where I was like at first just playing around with making a loop, exporting it in Premiere, and then this is like stock video as well. But like making a loop, exporting it, and then trying to kind of see what it looked like. And then I was like, oh, okay, it could progressively get more and more kind of messed up. So then I was like making a loop, exporting it from Premiere, uploading it to this site, glitching it out, downloading that, and then re-uploading that clip I just downloaded, and then continuously just getting it more and more kind of messed up. But yeah, it's I think if you Google, you can find something similar, or maybe I'll just send Dana a link. But it's literally just a website where you can download it. What's interesting is like I think it actually does like mess your video up, because sometimes like putting it back in Premiere, like the data moshing would like be different. It's like really interesting. So it's a little bit kind of that kind of technological like happenstance as well. But yeah, it's just a website that yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's funny, like a lot of and that's what I like about your practice, Emmett, is like a lot of the stuff that you do is like very accessible. It's just that you kind of like wade back into the water like time and time again. So like anyone can enter into it. It's just that like your inquiry is like recurring and reiterative, if that's a word.
Yeah, and like yeah, I mean, I'm kind of constantly like, I don't know, not maybe it's like a little bit of like imposter syndrome or whatever, where like, even with like this, I'm like, man, is data moshing like played out, or like, when I'm like making it, or the camcorder stuff. But then I'm like, you know what, like if you stop thinking about it as like a fetishized like approach or something, and then it's just like another thing in your catalog. And all these images like, but I'm constantly trying to make it, and I think it's what you're saying too, like even like putting this like blue filter over it, which is like something that I did really early on when I was learning like photography, like almost like too much like Photoshop, like just like putting like weird gradients and stuff over images and like making it really like singular. Even stuff like that, it's like all, the goal is that all these things can kind of live together. And I think, that's kind of what I aim for. So like, it doesn't feel as random and like cliche or whatever, where or I don't know, or if it's kind of you know, an approach that is very well trodden, it's like I think it fits you know, visually, and you know, it's kind of fun because people like these things, some of these things like come and go. And but yeah, I don't know, you can't really think about it in that way, I guess.
Well, I think like I was definitely thinking about that with the Avatar DVD. It's just so weird to like, I don't know how old that picture is, but like to chart Avatar's presence in the cultural zeitgeist, as it were, is like it like probably matches like a corona wave outbreak chart.
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't even think I'd seen Avatar when I like found that thing, but I think it's like 2018 or 19, but yeah, you know, it's like yeah, sometimes it's like these objects, if they don't have personal relevance to me, um beyond like my interest in them, they're objects that are kind of maybe culturally relevant in some way, or you know, recognizable from like the pop culture. Um and yeah, the sort of out of time sense of it that you're saying, like I mean, that goes back to like hauntology, school of thought as well, where like, you know, and even camcorder, especially camcorder, like if you start reading into that stuff, like, you know, it's about like, so think about like how many like popular music is like utilizing like 80s and 90s like sounds, like, you know, break beats, or it sounds like 80s pop music or whatever. Like that's kind of this idea of like we're constantly just, there's this specter of like nostalgia that kind of is inescapable, and everything's kind of on top of, you know, one another. um so yeah, and that happens literally as well with finding things out and about.
It's funny. Natasha took my Super 8 class last summer. Speaking of
Oh, cool.
nostalgia and recurring, does anyone have any further questions? I don't want to. I've got one that I want to close out with. I don't want to take too much of Emmett's time. Jackson, I don't know if you wanted to type any questions into the chat. Feel free.
I fixed my mic at least. Can you hear me
Oh,
okay?
yes, yes.
Yeah, I was just messing with stuff. This is kind of probably a played out and pretty basic question, but earlier you mentioned like, you know, evolving of taste. Like, where did you start? Were you just some kid with like a point and shoot walking around at one point? You know, how do you get this from like beginning somewhere?
I mean, I think like the it definitely like time, I think the doing it over and over is kind of where what kind of started me on the road. Like when I was in school, I never really like I was sort of confident in my abilities of like image making, but like I didn't really have the articulation of like what was drawing me to certain things, or how to articulate my resistance to, not to put down you know, this approach, but like I feel like it's maybe, or at least when I was in school, it was sort of a thing where it was like everyone in your class kind of had like their thing that they made work about. And you know, it was like, well, there's the person that makes work about their friend's mom, you know, or there's the person that makes work about, you know, abandoned malls or whatever it is. Like and I tried like literally, I can think of like 10 different things where I was like in my like my freshman and, you know, my introductory years, where I was like, oh, maybe I'll be the guy that does like live concert photography, like or you know, or like I did the abandoned building thing for a little while. And and another example that I didn't include an image from in this, but I do like on my website, is like I was like, oh, maybe I'm gonna document like hunting, like South, you know, the Southern kind of culture of like you know, hunting, and I photographed like this kid in his like uniform or whatever. And it never really felt right to me. And I think like in the end, like what you see here is like eventually just realizing like you can just take all of those examples, pick one image from all of those, you know, scenarios, and just put them together. And so that, you know, ultimately it had to involve me trying a bunch of different things. And then I think I slowly became more deliberate about knowing what my like, okay, this is how I like making these images, but in terms of what they are and how I'm getting there, it's like just sort of trying and following intuition, and trusting that like when you're drawing from the library to make a sequence, like you'll have enough material that maybe they come from disparate shoots, and maybe, you know, there wasn't an overarching thing, you know, but you kind of end up spelling that out when you're kind of subconsciously retracing your steps. And so that's basically how I work today. Like I'll sometimes I'll set up shoots with people. Sometimes I'm, just getting out of my car when I'm driving and I see something and I just quickly jump out and I photograph something. Other times, it's kind of, like I said, holding on to something and then doing something with it later. So yeah, but early on, and then also it extends just quickly beyond photography as well. Like, you know, when I was saying about like music, it's like I even like, and maybe this isn't obvious, or maybe this sounds, you know, a little bit extreme, but like even down to like the graphics on like the shirts that I wear, like nothing is like ironic. It's all stuff where I'm like, this literally is like part of my aesthetic world. And like, and there's, there's a continuity even in like the music that I'm listening to when I'm driving around, and then I see something, right? And I'm like, oh, that's kind of doing something with the music, and I'm going to jump out and take a photo of it. It extends to like, like I'm really into film, and like I said, watching a bunch of movies, like seeking out things that I'm like, hey, this sounds like something that is relevant to my interests, or it visually looks interesting. So it's constantly drawing in, and I go to a lot of art shows. Again, another kind of cool thing about living in LA is, you know, you get kind of this really wide spectrum of art in galleries. So yeah, a long-winded way to say, just kind of endless curiosity of like what's around you and things that aren't even art related, but like, or related to your own making art, but just kind of, exploring your world and things that kind of come across your path. But yeah, early on, it did take a little bit of a time, but, as I said, I think a few times, like in doing the thing, like that becomes, I still think I'll go into, I'll think about things I want to make, and then, going into a shoot, I'm like, this is like the narrative of the photo shoot I'm about to do. And then, like I said, in the end, I just come out with like, oh yeah, this is like my kind of anonymous portrait that I take all the time. But even just kind of having that other idea to get me going, then it kind of results in like the stuff that I end up using.
Those are good. I always like those questions, Jackson. They're like, where did you start? How did you get here? I don't want to take too much of your time. Like we were past an hour. I just wanted to ask in like a very logistical sense, like I love the idea of saving stuff that you find for later use, but like if I turn my camera around, it's like a freaking hoarder's nightmare of like broken electronics and like, we don't let the cat in here anymore. Like, is that like, you're talking about like, stuff you find on the ground? Like, is there a corner of your studio where it's like, or do you have like an expiration date? Like after 5 years, I have to throw stuff out. Like logistically, how does this sort of like sampled object thing work for you?
Maybe the timeline is definitely maybe a bit faster, than like years. But the other thing that's kind of nice is like, a lot of times they're tiny objects. So, although I've actually like, it's outside on my balcony, but I've got like a painting that I found like someone had thrown away on the street. So I'm kind of letting it like degrade in like the dust outside a little bit, but like it's just sitting out there. And it's in like this big ornate kind of gold frame. So I'm like, that's kind of incubating outside. But a lot of it's like tiny, it's like magazines or, ripped out pages from a magazine, or, ripping a rip page even further, like just in my desk drawer right here, like I've got these like little like crystal things that was like in a box on the street. So they're all like, they're relatively small scale. So I guess that's kind of one way that I'm able to mitigate. It doesn't take up too much real estate, but sometimes I'll like shove stuff away and I forget that I've like collected it. And going through my bookshelf or whatever, I'll find it and I'm like, oh wow, yeah, I need to do something with this. So yeah, it's all relatively small stuff, which kind of like maybe gets back to that like memento quality of certain things that I like. And other times it's things that just become like decorations. Like I'll buy it almost like to have like a little, I've got a few like kitschy sort of objects. This is one of them. This is like one of those like fake Oscars you get at like a Hollywood Boulevard store for like $5. I think it actually says like world's greatest artist or something on it, but like I bought that as like a joke for my room, and like it just sits on my desk, and like but then it's like, yeah, eventually that wasn't even planned to be used as like a prop per se, but then I ended up doing it. So I haven't had that be too big of an issue where it's like these massive collections of things, but I definitely relate to that like hoarder mentality of, and even like it extends digitally as well. Like there's so much, and I'm constantly trying to get better about this, and it's just like it never ends. But like I'm definitely like a digital hoarder, and like it's like chaos. Like even like my own archive is like stuff's like all over the place in different folders and subfolders, and there's like a pile of shit on my desktop that just like I'm constantly clearing, and then it fills up again. Of screenshots and and hard drive. I've got the same stack like behind my computer. So, and like none of them are labeled. It's like it's such an insane system. But like so in short, it's definitely a little bit of organized chaos. But that's kind of it sort of inevitably it makes like the sort of random nature of like stumbling upon something that you forgot that you took in, and then that kind of it comes back to the center.
Yeah, there's something maybe even more organic, like genuine rediscovery or even just discovery.
And it's even like that extends to, I think, what I was trying to say about when I taking a little while to sort of process what I've shot. I mean, this happens to me all the time. When I go back, my best like time working is when I go back into like Lightroom or whatever, and I'm going like from like 2 years ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, like that photo, like, and even shoots that I've done where I'm like, this was the best photo from that day, like 100%. I'll go back and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, it's this photograph. So having that space for me, like, I'm a bit of a slow worker, and I think if I can critique myself in some way, it's like I don't, and I think I said I'm trying to get better about this, but like I don't historically like put out that much into the world. And even though I'm kind of sitting on like even like works in progress, where I'm like, I get weird about even putting it on Instagram. The sort of would be like finality of like making it an Instagram post or whatever. And so, I'm trying to let loose a little bit more on that front, but I do kind of take long periods of like not even really looking at what I'm shooting that much, just shooting it and then archiving it. And then I'll just get bursts of energy where, especially with the mini DV, it's like, it's such a weird labor to like transfer it on my laptop, what I was saying. So sometimes I'll do that and I'll rip it. I'm like, I don't even want to go through it now because I'm like, I'll move into something else, but then I'll go back and it's like, boom, boom, boom. Like I find all the stuff that I want. So it's like these slow periods of like gathering and hoarding, punctuated by like rapid fire, like finishing something, making a zine, making a series, etc. Yeah.
Well, we're way over. Thank you so much, Emmett. I really appreciate it.
I have
sorry.
one question.
Yeah.
What camcorder do you have?
So I have, I meant to say that before. Like I'm not really like a gearhead at all, so I don't even know if this is like a good camcorder. But this is like a Canon ZR-80. which I'm only using it because when I looked on Craigslist like 3 years ago to get a camcorder, this was like the cheapest one and the closest one. Although this is actually the third this is the third camera of that type that I own, because I dropped the other one and then like the first one stopped working or something. So but you can get them for like $50 on eBay. So I'm thinking about maybe upgrading at some point to one that's a bit more kind of like a higher end. Like this is like, you know, mid 2000s, but getting one from that era that was a little high end, like for that time. And seeing if that, you know, there's ones that are almost like, they look like little like film, like video, you know, I don't know what you call them, like the Sony kind of handy cam stuff. Like they're a bit more heavy duty. I want to get into those, but yeah, that's the ZR-80. And it's funny that Jackson, you said something about point and shoots, because I do use those as well. Some of the images in this were actually made with like a $100 like Fuji digital point and shoot. And it's similar to camcorder. It's like it's just that kind of like it's really small, it's compact. I'm not carrying around a massive camera with me. Yeah. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's always nice to talk about my work. And yeah, hopefully there was some insight.
I think not to plug it, please don't feel obligated, but there is a link to Paradise Circus. One made it all the way to Tokyo, so if you're curious, I just think also for sure, like Natasha, you and I have had this discussion about booking your work. You've made zines, like you've definitely like moved in that direction. Emmett, it was kind of nuts to see those 4 images, because I remember when you put out, is it Too Much Heaven? I was like, that's such a sick title. Like, you know, I love this idea of you making books. And I've kind of like vaguely remember Griffin Avenue and La Mirada kind of like getting released. But to look at like 4 now, especially in how not quickly you put out stuff, like it's kind of incredible to see you building this library of work. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, like I said, like you know, it's a little bit of like not a learning curve in the sense of like, I mean, I'm using Blurb, which like their software is super easy. I've used Blurb for all of these. And I think actually they just released something where it got even easier, but you know, it's literally drag and drop. But you know, yeah, there's a bit, you know, I'm learning how to like not sequence necessarily, but you know, yeah, like what I was saying about like how to title something, or how to present, you know, does my name go on the front, or does it go on a page in the back, or does it go on both? Like, do you put page numbers? Like, so I'm like, and I own like all of these books that like I forget about, and so I'm trying to go back through those too and see how, you know, other people do it. And eventually I would like to make something a bit more, I mean, these are all like soft cover. I think they're great for like the cost and all that. But I would eventually like to make something that's like more substantial, that maybe almost combines like all of these, you know, library of images. Yeah, I might do like a Too Much Heaven sequel book or something, just because I want to use that title again.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, it's just a lot of fun to like, you know, and then even shooting the book, it's like, it's just, everything just begets more content, you know, like it's a prompt to make the zine. It's a prompt to shoot the thing. It's a prompt to make the zine. It's a prompt to photograph the zine. And then that, you know, it's getting the wheels turning, and then one thing kind of leads to another. And yeah, you know, even when I was laying this out, I agree. Like, it's like, oh wow, yeah, it's fun to like, you know, you see the continuity and the evolution maybe, and you know, they are kind of like nice little benchmarks.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emmett. This was awesome. I freaking love hearing you talk about your work. It's always inspiring. I took like a page of notes. Yeah, I appreciate your time. Natasha, Jackson, thank you so much for joining us live. That was awesome.
Yeah, feel free.
Thank you.
I don't know if you already have, but you know, drop my links or contact or whatever. Yeah, always fun to chat about art and you know, get connected with you know, with things happening out in the real world creatively. So
yeah, it's all right if with everyone, if I mean, Jackson, your camera's not on, but if I post a picture of the screen on Instagram just to celebrate this.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool, cool.
I fixed my camera. Do you want me to turn it on?
Oh wait, yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, I have also, like you, I have a graveyard of electronics, and I was digging through it for an old webcam,
Nice.
and I found one.
Oh, nice, excellent.
Hold on. Let's see if this works. There I am.
Nice,
Nice.
yay! All right, for the gram. Come in close.
Oh.
All right. Cool. Do I have any other questions before I let you go? Yeah, I don't know, Natasha, if you want, you should drop your Instagram in, not to call you out again. And Jackson too, if you're creative, you want to share Instagram with Emmett, since we're in the chat, you can. Before
Oh yeah,
we-
I'll drop.
yeah. Look at me just being extremely forceful.
Check me out. I'll drop my website there too. Look at this stuff if you're interested. And then if you want to follow, oh wait, Natasha, you already followed me, and I think I follow you too. So
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I just started following you the other day.
cool.
Oh, this is done already. All right, nice.
Cool. Yeah. So this was really awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Emmett.
And yeah, until next time.
Until next time, yeah. Jackson, very good to see you. Natasha, incredible always to see you in person, face to face. And Emmett, such a treat. So yeah, I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Cool, dude.
All right.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Yep.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Later.